We were supposed to wrap up by lunch. City had us on heat seal duty along 4th and Main. Nothing serious. Just filling cracks the rain kept widening across the same stretch of worn asphalt we'd patched back in March. I was running the portable torch while Ben handled the marker cones and the caution tape. The heat off the pavement was annoying, but it was one of those clean days. Sun was out, traffic crawling like always, and we'd found a rhythm. Ben was 2 years younger than me, leaner, wore his vest like it barely mattered, always humming something under his breath. We both knew the drill. Show up, fix what's cracked, keep moving. I was halfway down a fault line near the corner of the intersection, bent at the waist with one gloved hand steadying the nozzle, when something under the ground shifted. It wasn't dramatic, just a tremor that made the loose gravel twitch. At first, I figured a delivery truck had backed over a curb nearby, or maybe there was minor blasting at the old courthouse site across the freeway. Not uncommon, nothing to panic over. Ben stood up from where he was unwinding cable near the hydrant. You feel that? He stretched his neck a little, eyes flicking to the skyline. Yeah, probably city pipes again, or that crap from under 10th leaking south. I wiped my forehead and went back to it. I wanted to finish the joint before the heat really settled in for the day. Then came the second one. I heard it before I felt it, like compressed air blowing through a huge vent, and then the sound just cracked through the air. No echo, no roll, a clean pop that made the rebar in the curb ring. Shadows slid across the block fast and strange. People on the sidewalk around us stopped. One guy behind the wheel of a red SUV leaned halfway out of his window, staring straight up. I followed his gaze. Something was moving across the sky, glowing white at the core, trailing heat or vapor that shimmered against the blue. I counted 6 of them. No wings, no smoke, just brilliant white streaks angling down in broken formation. One of them peeled off hard and came down fast, behind the skyline toward the industrial zone. A second or two passed, then a flash rolled over the rooftops, a wide burst of light so bright I blinked. Then came the sound, something between a crash and a deep impact. It pushed into my chest like a piledriver slamming concrete. Ben took a few steps closer to me. That wasn't thunder. No, I was already pulling off my gloves. A few people nearby had their phones up, filming. Horns were honking up the block. A delivery van reversed into a pole trying to pull a U-turn. Then every phone buzzed at once, mine included. That jolted more people than the flash did. The alert banner lit up my lock screen bright red, and even before I read it, I knew this wasn't a weather thing. Emergency alert. Biological contamination event confirmed. Shelter indoors immediately. Avoid meteor fragments. That was all it said. No newsfeed link, no map, no timestamp. Just those 4 lines. I scrolled, but there was nothing below them. The signal bars on my phone had already dropped to 1. I showed the screen to Ben, and he just shook his head. You ever seen something like this? Not even close. The ground jumped again. Not a tremor, an impact. I turned around, looking back toward where we parked the city truck. The pavement about 10 yards behind it cracked in 3 places all at once, like someone had punched up from underneath. Then the center of that triangle fell in, leaving a hole the size of a manhole cover. Steam poured out thick and wet, and underneath it, a faint glow, blue, white, unsteady, like a pulsing LED buried under sand. Ben started backing up, and I did the same. That was no gas line rupture. It smelled wrong, like electrical burns and something sharper, sweet but chemical. I saw the glow intensify, and something inside the crater shifted. It rose up slightly, and then curled. Not smoke, not fluid, something with shape. I dropped the torch, and didn't look back. We made a run for the truck. I climbed into the driver's seat and fumbled the keys into the ignition. Ben was in before I even slammed the door. I hit the lights and peeled over one of our own cones, pulling a hard right toward the next street. We made it a block and a half before the dash lights flickered, then went dark. The radio made a sharp tone, flat and high, then fizzled out. The screen blanked. The truck died in the middle of the lane. "Don't touch anything," I said, unsure why I said it. Maybe instinct. Something was wrong with the air in here now, like the temperature had changed without the AC moving. Ben looked up at the windshield, then tapped it. "You seeing that?" Something had landed on the roof. I couldn't see it fully, but from the edge of the window, a curved shape was visible. Glassy, semi-wet, about the size of a backpack. It wasn't from any truckload I'd ever seen. Steam hissed off it and left a residue on the windshield that started to spread outward in lines. Perfect, symmetrical lines. We jumped out of the truck and sprinted into the alley behind a cafe. I didn't think about tools, gear, nothing. Just got clear of the street. Behind us, I heard a grinding noise. Soft but deliberate, like pressure being applied to metal until it warped. The truck's frame was sinking into itself. That's the only way I can describe it. It wasn't blowing up. It was folding. We ducked behind a dumpster, breathing through our sleeves. I kept checking my phone, but it was frozen on the same alert. No signal, no updates. Ben crouched with his back to the brick wall, eyes flicking back toward the street. "We need to get out of this zone. Don't wait for the city. Don't wait for emergency crews. Just walk, east or south, anywhere away from the impact." Agreed. We cut through the service alley, get to the tracks. There's a storm underpass near Temple Street. If it's not sealed, we can get across without being seen. Before we moved, I heard the sound of something overhead. Soft humming. Then a drone circled past at low altitude. It was unmarked. Just a solid black frame, no visible camera. It slowed when it reached our position, then sped off again. No voice, no warning. We made it into the barbershop across the alley. It had one of those old rotating signs, frozen mid-spin. Inside, the lights were out. Chairs overturned. No one inside. A half-drunk bottle of cola sat on the counter near the register, condensation still dripping. Someone left fast. The flat screen above the mirrors showed nothing but static. I tried the landline behind the counter. Dead. We sat behind the counter for nearly an hour. Every few minutes we heard another impact. Sometimes far off. Sometimes just a block away. We didn't move. The power grid in the area was failing block by block. And outside, the crater near the truck was still glowing. We could see the reflection off the metal grates down the block. But it was changing, growing wider and forming patterns. Circular channels across the asphalt. Not random. Something was shaping it. Ben stood slowly, looked out through the side window. His voice was quiet. "Something's upstairs." "What?" I got up quick, crossed to the stairwell door. The sound was faint, heavy footsteps. Not rushed, deliberate, not right. We waited by the back door in silence. The steps came partway down, then stopped. Neither of us breathed. After maybe 5 minutes, the building settled again, and the sound was gone. We left through the back before nightfall. Outside, just past the corner, we saw a man slumped behind a row of mailboxes. He was wearing a courier uniform. At first glance, he looked dead, but something about him made me stop short. His skin had a sheen to it, dry like clay cracking in the sun. His eyes were open, but not seeing. Clothes shimmered faintly under the light. Not wet, just wrong. I took a step closer and crouched just enough to get a better look. His posture wasn't natural. It was like someone had folded him down gently, then forgotten to close him all the way. His knees were bent the wrong way, not broken, just bent. The label on his chest read, T. Sanchez. His cap was gone. The skin around his temples was pulled tight, thin enough that I could see veins beneath it, but not red or blue, more like faint branching lines of dull metal. I don't know how long he'd been sitting like that, but there were no flies, no smell. Nothing about it felt like decay. It looked more like he'd stopped, not died, just stopped. Ben stood behind me, arms crossed, mouth tight. He didn't say anything right away, but I could tell he was looking at Sanchez's fingers. The nails had started to grow past normal, thin and curled, but not in the usual way. They were too smooth, almost translucent. One of the fingertips had cracked down the middle, but there was no blood. The split had dried like heat-shattered plastic. Ben spoke, voice low but steady. "If he's breathing, I don't want to know." Then he turned and started walking fast down the sidewalk. I followed without arguing. We didn't check for a pulse, didn't check his bag. There were things I didn't want to touch, and that man was one of them. The power had gone out in most of the buildings by then. Even the traffic lights had stopped blinking. I kept expecting to hear sirens, or helicopters, or emergency announcements, but the air was still. The only sound was the wind, and even that felt strange, like it was too controlled, too constant. We moved along the east side of the street, staying close to walls, trying to avoid any vehicles with visible damage. A few more blocks and we saw the perimeter. Not police tape, real fencing, steel mesh barriers like the kind they use around high-security demolition sites. They weren't there an hour ago. We froze behind the corner of a pharmacy, watching. A line of armored vehicles blocked off the road. Soldiers were posted in front of them, but none wore standard issue. No flags, no name tags. Full suits, sealed helmets. They carried gear I didn't recognize. Sleek, grey packs with narrow-barreled rifles slung tight across their chests. Not National Guard, not any city unit I'd ever seen. There was a sign mounted on the barrier in plain stencil font. Quarantine zone, class red, no exit permitted. Below it smaller, "If you are reading this, do not attempt to cross. You have been exposed. Stay in place. Medical response is coming." I didn't believe it. Not after what we saw. Ben leaned in close. "They're not checking ID. They're not even scanning. They're just holding the line." "They think it's airborne?" "No. If it was, they wouldn't be standing there breathing it in. They're not trying to stop it from spreading. They're trying to keep us from seeing it." We backed off before they could spot us. Cut back through a strip of shops, dry cleaners, nail salon, closed pizza joint, and found a service alley with a manhole cover that hadn't been touched in years. I remembered that part of the grid from earlier work orders. The line ran east and curved toward the old substation. If we could follow it far enough, we might be able to get out from under the grid without passing through the checkpoint. Ben helped me pry the cover. It came off harder than I expected, sealed with rust and city grime. The tunnel below smelled damp but not foul, just stale. I dropped in first, used my belt light to scan both directions. Narrow passage, concrete base with cables snaking along one side, pipes overhead. No movement. Ben followed after a few seconds. We stayed low and kept quiet. The air was thick, but we could still breathe. It wasn't toxic. We kept moving east, stepping over pools of runoff and broken rebar. Twice we passed wall markings with outdated tags from earlier utility teams. Most were faded, a few were fresh, but nothing recent. No sign that anyone had used this route today. We must have walked 20 minutes. Then the light changed. It wasn't the belt lamp. The tunnel ahead was faintly illuminated by something. Not bright, but visible. Pale blue-white. Same tone as the glow we saw from the crater. Ben stopped behind me, and I killed the lamp. The glow didn't come from a fixture. It came from the wall itself. About 5 yards ahead, a section of concrete had cracked. Thin strands, veins almost, were pushing through it, gently pulsing. They looked like mineral roots. They weren't growing fast, but they were moving. I couldn't tell how deep they went, but some had merged into the cable conduit. I turned to Ben. "We don't touch that. We backtrack and take the Temple Street vent." "You sure we can get it open?" "Better odds than going past that." We turned back, retraced steps, and made for the ladder at the nearest junction. The climb up was rough, slick rungs, water stains, and too quiet. But when I pushed up on the cover, it slid free. We emerged into a narrow utility corridor behind an old high school. I used to do patchwork there, knew the janitor before he retired. Everything was dead. The school grounds were deserted. Windows were intact, but all the doors had been chained shut from the outside. Someone had scrawled, Close 1023 across the front in red tape. I didn't know what that meant. We cut through the courtyard, past a cracked basketball court, and reached the access road. That's where we found the first body pile. It wasn't big, just 4. 2 adults, 2 kids, covered with a tarp poorly. Looked like someone had tried to shield them, then left in a hurry. No wounds, no signs of trauma, just stillness. The tarp was already stiff. Ben stopped cold. That's a family. That's not a group. That's a unit. They weren't random. We don't know what happened. We're not lifting it. We moved on. Fast. Beyond the school, we reached the edge of the park. It was usually busy during the day. Parents, joggers, old-timers feeding birds. Now it was quiet. Not empty, but wrong. Half the benches had dust coating them thick enough to leave marks. The grass had a shimmer to it, not dew, too uniform. A line of pigeons sat motionless on a fence, all facing the same direction. Not one moved as we passed. We found shelter near the maintenance building behind the baseball field. Cinder block walls, steel roof, half a door off its hinges. Inside, we found a folding table, a busted chair, and a city water map tacked to the wall. I tore it down and folded it. Could be useful. There was no power, but the place was dry, and we needed rest. Ben sat down on the ground and pulled out a protein bar from his vest pocket. He held it up like he was offering one, but I shook my head. Wasn't hungry. I kept looking out the door. This isn't quarantine, he muttered between bites. This is something else. Something they didn't plan for. He was right, but I didn't say it. I sat across from him on the cold slab of concrete floor, back to the cinder block wall, legs stiff. My boots were soaked through. My belt light was already flickering. I didn't want to turn it off yet, but I couldn't afford to leave it running either. Outside the maintenance shed, the park was too quiet. Not just lacking people, lacking the normal ambient noise that filled space when nothing else was happening. No traffic from distant freeways, no sirens, no dogs, nothing. Just that low wind brushing across the dry leaves. It wasn't carrying scent anymore. I kept my eyes on the opening where the door used to be. We hadn't lit anything inside. I didn't want to risk being seen. Whatever was roaming out there near the church didn't move like any person I'd seen. It wasn't tall because of its posture. It was tall because it didn't fold its joints the way we do. Its arms were longer than they should have been. Even from this far away, I could tell they reached nearly to the knees. Its gait was all wrong, fluid and efficient, but not human. No stutter, no shift of weight. It walked like it knew exactly how much energy each step cost. I couldn't even be sure it had a face. I thought I saw something that might have been eyes, but I wasn't close enough to say for sure. It stopped once, stood motionless in the middle of the street, and looked around. That was the worst part. It was scanning the area, not reacting to sound or light. It was searching, not hunting like an animal, searching with intent. Ben stayed silent for a while after that. He finished the bar and kept the wrapper in his hand. His breathing stayed steady, but I could tell he was thinking the same thing I was. It wasn't just that something had come down from the sky. It was that something had come out of whatever came down. When the last of the sun disappeared behind the broken tree line, we heard it again. Not that thing's footsteps, something else. A short, high-pitched whine followed by a heavy series of impacts, fast, hard, coming from the eastern slope just past the park. Then a scream, a real one, human. It didn't last long. I was on my feet by the time the scream ended. Ben moved beside me without a word. We didn't even talk about it. We left the shed, keeping low along the outer fence line, until we reached the edge of the service road that ran past the park and split off toward the creek. The sky was still dim with that chemical haze. My night vision was shot from staring at the belt light too long. Still, we both saw the movement across the lot near the church annex. There were 3 people, 2 running, 1 down. The 2 moving figures were stumbling across the pavement, one limping badly. Looked like a civilian and someone in medical scrubs. The third was collapsed halfway through the gravel. A body. Between them and the church stood the shape we saw earlier. It was larger up close than I'd realized. Maybe 7 feet tall, but narrow. Ribbed. Its arms hung at its sides. Its upper limbs weren't still. They kept flexing, twitching. Not erratically. Just ready. The figure in scrubs waved something overhead. Maybe a flashlight or a broken phone, but it didn't give off light. She yelled something at the other person and turned back toward the fallen one. The tall thing started walking, not charging, just moving, 1 step at a time. Ben and I ducked behind a tree stump. We were maybe 60 yards out. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop. The woman tried to pull the third person by the arms. The tall thing reached her before she got him up. It didn't pounce, it reached. I've seen animals kill before. I've seen people die. This wasn't like that. There was no noise. The moment contact was made, the woman went rigid. Her arms stopped moving, mid-tension, like she'd frozen in place. The tall figure held her there with one arm across her shoulders. Then, something changed. The woman's knees bent wrong, her head tilted back, and her legs gave out. There was no blood, no scream, no visible strike, just collapse. The man who'd been limping didn't even look back. He ran into the next street, disappeared between buildings. The tall thing remained over the 2 bodies, motionless for a long time. Then it turned, bent down, and picked up the woman's arm. Not dragging, studying. The light from behind the church caught something along its upper spine. A line of raised edges or plates. They moved slowly as it turned again and vanished around the side wall. Ben whispered, but not to me. He just said, "They're not killing for food." We waited another minute before we moved again. I knew where the old road crews used to stash spare tools, north corner near the park fence line. There were supposed to be 2 sealed boxes there under the bench slabs. One was still there. We pried it open. Inside was a flashlight, a flare, a city-issue pry bar, and a ratty thermal poncho. Not much, but better than nothing. I took the flashlight, turned it once to test. Dim, but usable. Ben pocketed the flare. We pushed east through the back of the park until we hit the storm drainage wall. I knew this section. Years ago, the city planned to convert it into a paved greenway, but funding fell through. Still had accessible slopes. If we dropped in and followed the main channel, we could skirt the exposed neighborhoods and maybe reach the train yard. If trains were running, even on manual, we might find a path out, or at least shelter. The walls inside the channel were slick. I lowered myself down with care, keeping pressure on my boots and one hand against the sloped edge. Ben followed. At the base, the shallow water smelled clean, not sewage runoff, just recent rain. We moved north, flash off, relying on ambient light from the opening above. Concrete echoed everything. We kept footsteps tight and quiet. About 10 minutes in, we heard footsteps echoing behind us. Not ours. Another set. Slow, precise. I killed the flashlight. We crouched against the east wall under a runoff pipe. I counted the rhythm. 5 steps. Pause. Another 5. But no breathing. No voice. Nothing dragged. Just that even pressure. We didn't look back. Whoever, or whatever, was behind us never broke pace. It didn't speed up. It didn't slow down. It just matched the distance. Eventually we saw the grate up ahead where the channel turned into a culvert. Ben got there first, climbed fast. I followed. We pushed through the service gate. Once the latch clicked behind us, the footsteps stopped. I don't know if it followed us out. We didn't stay to check. The train yard was half a mile beyond the culvert. We reached it just after midnight. The outer gates were shut, but the side entry for maintenance workers was half open. We slipped through. Inside, the yard was lit with floodlights, barely flickering. Some lines had gone dead. A few boxcars were still sitting on the rails. One of the old diesel engines was partially powered, humming low. No crew. We crossed 3 tracks and climbed into a maintenance trailer. The door was open. Inside, someone had been living there. Cans, tools, a cot, a city radio set powered off. and a satchel with 6 bottled waters and a half-eaten pack of jerky. No sign of the person. No signs of struggle either. Just left behind. Ben sat on the cot and rubbed his face. He hadn't said much since the park. He finally looked up and said, "I think the city's already gone. Not the buildings. The people. It's converting them." That woman, she didn't die like normal. She just shut off. Like a breaker flipped. The power, the noise, the plants. I think whatever came down, it's spreading itself by making the world into what it wants. We stayed in the trailer for an hour. I found a paper map in one of the drawers. I marked our location and the place where we saw the creature. I circled every major intersection we passed and noted where the barriers were. Not sure why. Habit maybe. Or maybe I thought someone would read it later. Ben slept in intervals, head against the wall. I stayed up, watching the dark shapes pass between train cars outside the window. None of them made a sound. I counted 4 before dawn. Not human, not animals. Ben slept through most of it. Not deep sleep, but enough to reset his face a little. His back stayed flat against the wall. One leg bent, arms crossed like he expected to wake up running. He didn't snore, didn't twitch. When the lights in the yard started to flicker again, I put the map away and stood by the window. There were more of them now, those tall figures. Same gait, same smooth, steady movement. I counted 3 in the hour after midnight, but none of them came close. They moved through the yard without urgency, as if they knew where everything was and knew none of it posed a threat. When Ben woke up, he didn't ask how long he'd been out. He just looked at me, then at the door. I gave a small nod. We didn't speak. We took what we could carry, a small flashlight, the satchel with water, the map, and left the trailer before first light. The train yard sloped down toward a switching tunnel near the riverfront. That's where we were heading. The tunnel led under the old district and came out near the mainline bridge. If we could get past the bridge, we could make it to the utility compound just outside the boundary. Maybe find a functioning relay point, or at least a place with walls. But everything felt more unstable now. The air wasn't just heavy, it was thick, like pressure was building in the zone. The clouds overhead weren't moving naturally. They hovered, long streaks of ash-colored haze frozen above certain blocks. We stayed close to the tracks, keeping low between the taller stacks of steel. The main path was clear for now. It wasn't until we reached the yard's lower platform that we heard something new. Shouting. Young. Frantic. It echoed off the side of a half-loaded freight car. A second later, we heard a smaller voice shouting back. Ben took off before I could stop him. He darted between 2 containers, hands low, shoulders tucked, and I followed. We rounded a corner just in time to see a kid, maybe 11, 12, stuck at the far end of the platform. His backpack strap was snagged on a broken fence link, caught between the gate and the concrete lip. A man stood near him, older teen, maybe 20, yelling for help while trying to free the kid's arm. The teen gave up after a moment, shoved the strap forward, and pulled the kid hard. The strap ripped, and the kid stumbled backward and ran, leaving the pack behind. The teen yelled again, pointing at something behind us, then ran after the boy. Ben didn't move. He stood frozen, half turned toward the platform, watching where the boy had just run. I reached him fast, put a hand on his shoulder, trying to pull him back toward cover. He didn't respond. "Ben, move. We have to go. Come on." He didn't blink. His left foot was mid-step, as if he'd just paused between motions. But the posture didn't look natural. I waved a hand in front of his eyes. No reaction. His mouth was slightly open. I took a step around and looked closer. His skin, around the neck, the temple, under the collar, had that same dry shimmer I'd seen on the courier. Faint at first, but visible. A glossy dusting, spreading along the veins beneath the skin like glass beneath frost. I checked his pulse. It was still there, slower than it should have been. His breathing was shallow, chest barely moving. But he wasn't gone. Not yet. The shoulder of his vest had a smear on it. Not blood, not dirt. It was like a film of transparent fluid had been wiped across him and then left to harden. I followed the mark up toward his neck and saw the edge of something embedded just below his ear. A hair-thin strand, colorless, anchored into the skin like a hook made of resin. I looked back toward the fence. There was no one there now. No boy, no teen, no creature, nothing. I scanned the lot again. Nothing moved. No sound. No birds. No wind. I tried to speak to him again, told him we needed to move. I slapped his arm lightly, then harder. No reaction. I tried pulling him backward by the belt, just enough to shift his weight. That's when I realized he wasn't just still, he was locked. His body had no give. Joints didn't bend. His posture held, muscle-bound and rigid. It was like trying to move a statue. Then I heard it. Not behind me. Not next to me. It was in the air. A high, tonal vibration. Very faint, not mechanical. It resonated low through the platform floor. It didn't hurt my ears, but I felt it behind my teeth. Ben twitched. Only once, just his hand. Then the sound stopped. I didn't know what to do. I crouched in front of him again, tried to cover his back with my jacket. Didn't help. His eyes weren't tracking anything. I didn't want to leave him, but I couldn't move him either. Not without gear, not without help, but help wasn't coming. I sat down next to him, breathing slow, trying not to panic. There was a rail cart near the edge of the platform, half collapsed, mostly rusted. If I could get something under his legs and balance his weight, maybe I could shift him, roll him out of the open space, just far enough to get under cover. I grabbed a piece of sheet metal nearby, twisted it loose, and used it like a pry bar under his heels. With enough leverage, I managed to tip him just an inch backward. Then he exhaled, just once. His mouth opened, but no words came out, just breath. I leaned in. Ben, say something. His fingers moved. Not a lot, just a curl at the knuckle. Then something behind me clicked. A soft mechanical sound, like glass cracking under tension. I turned fast. At the far edge of the yard, near the last line of parked freight cars, stood one of the tall figures. This one wasn't walking. It was standing, facing us, watching. I stepped in front of Ben instinctively. The figure didn't move. It stood there, maybe 40 yards out, one hand lowered, the other slightly raised. Its torso expanded once, slow, as if it were pulling in air. Then it took a step forward. Not fast, just measured, like it was confirming position. I pulled the flare from the satchel, snapped it open. Red light burst into the gloom. I didn't throw it. I held it low, letting the smoke bleed across the ground. The figure stopped, then turned, walked away. Ben gasped. I spun back. His legs buckled. I caught him before he hit the floor. He was blinking, eyes flicking wildly, breath shaking. I eased him down against the side of the cart and kept my voice low. You're all right. You're back. Can you move? His hands grabbed mine hard. It was in my head. His voice cracked. It saw everything, not just what I saw today. Everything. He couldn't explain more. I didn't ask. I helped him sit up and gave him water. He drank slow. His hands shook. The shimmer in his skin faded a little, but not completely. He was quiet for a few minutes after that, breathing steady but shallow, eyes darting toward shadows in the yard. Every time a light flickered or a distant clang echoed off a rail, his shoulders tightened again. It didn't take a doctor to see he was still unstable, maybe physically, definitely mentally. Something had entered him, even if it hadn't stayed. The way he described it, how it saw everything, still sat in the back of my mind, scraping at the edge of belief. I wasn't ready to understand it. Not yet. Not while we were still inside the zone. I didn't know what else to do except keep moving. He was walking barely, and he could speak again. That was enough. I helped him up and we started south, away from the freight lot, following the edge of the switching tunnel toward the service road. My plan, if you could call it that, was to get to St. Andrew's Hospital. It sat 4 blocks off the river and backed up against the fire station. If any structure in the city had an emergency generator still working, it was going to be there. If the place hadn't been overrun or sealed like everything else, maybe someone remained inside. A doctor, a nurse, anyone. Maybe they'd seen someone else frozen and knew what to do. Ben didn't argue when I told him. He just nodded and kept walking. His movements weren't smooth. He looked like a man carrying an invisible weight strapped around his spine. But he didn't ask to stop either. I could tell he was scared to pause for too long. Scared it might happen again. I didn't say that out loud. Just stayed near him and watched the rooftops as we crossed under the old tram bridge. The streets around the hospital had that same look the rest of the city had started to take on. Nothing burned, nothing screamed, but everything was still. Cars were parked too straight. Debris was swept oddly clean in places where the wind didn't reach. We passed a payphone that had been melted at the base. No heat marks, just slumped. Half a bench outside a bakery was missing, with the remaining portion fused directly into the sidewalk. No cracks, like the steel had decided it was time to become part of the concrete. St. Andrew's was 5 stories tall, brick outer shell, flat roof with a helipad that hadn't been used in years. Generator units on the south wing and an ambulance bay beneath the elevated drive. We came in through the lot entrance. The automatic doors were jammed partway open, propped with a broken cart someone had shoved into the track. The power inside was barely holding. A few green emergency lights lit the hall in uneven bars. We didn't call out. I didn't trust the quiet anymore. Instead, I kept a hand on Ben's arm as we moved past reception. The chairs in the waiting area were empty, but someone had stacked the magazines neatly on each cushion, 1 per seat. No dust, fresh alignment. Small things stood out now. Small things made my skin crawl. The main corridor led to triage and imaging. The doors had been wedged open with mop handles. We passed 3 gurneys, all empty, no straps or linens, just bare frames pushed against the walls. There were boot prints on the floor near the trauma bays. Big ones, same spacing we saw at the yard, same straight measured walk, not soldiers, not staff. Ben grabbed my shoulder and pointed. A sign above the double doors read, "Internal Medicine." Behind it was the stairwell. If we could reach the upper floors, maybe we'd find more shelter. Or someone alive. We didn't make it that far. The first noise came from above, sharp, sudden, like something slicing through heavy air. I turned my head just in time to see the corridor ahead flash, with a burst of white-blue light through the windows. It wasn't lightning. It came from the sky but didn't fade. It built. A slow, pulsing brightness that grew until the hallway shadows disappeared. Everything inside the building turned white. Then the sound hit. Not a bang, not thunder, just pressure. A vibration so deep I felt it in my knees before I heard it in my ears. It rattled the ceiling tiles loose and cracked the overhead lights. Ben dropped into a crouch beside a cabinet. I pressed us both under the counter just before the windows facing the lot blew inward. Glass shattered across the linoleum. The light outside kept growing. I crawled forward and looked out. And there it was. In the middle of the parking lot, directly on the ambulance bay, was a crater. Deep, fresh, still smoking. Not wide like the first one we saw. This was compact. But the depth, it went down farther than it should have. Asphalt had folded inward like fabric. Chunks of blacktop and steel rebar sat in a twisted arc around the edge. At the center of the pit, embedded like it had been thrown from orbit, was a shard. Smooth, black, veined with faint blue light. It wasn't molten. It wasn't steaming anymore. It just sat there, perfectly still. The shape of it matched what I remembered from the first impact site. But this one was sharper, taller, more defined. Whatever had come down, it had come back. Ben stood slowly behind me, shielding his eyes from the haze coming through the broken frame. He didn't speak. Neither of us moved toward it. Then, from deep inside the crater, something shifted. Not the shard. Not the debris. The light. It grew brighter, whiter, then dark, then bright again. Pulsing. Slow, then faster. A rhythm. Not random. Not chaos. Something trying to sink. And on the third cycle, I felt my teeth ache. Ben stepped back into the wall behind us. I heard him say, "It's calling to something." He wasn't looking at the crater anymore. He was looking at the stairwell. I turned. The corridor that led to pediatrics, dark 5 seconds ago, was now lit faintly by the same glow we saw at the crater. The light didn't come from fixtures. It came from the walls themselves. Threads of it, like veins, branching outward from the baseboards up the ceiling. The paint peeled as the strands spread. We ran. I didn't stop to check rooms, didn't check for survivors. There weren't any. Not anymore. I could feel it now. The air had changed. The silence was over. Something was coming up from the crater. Not a person, not a thing. Just presence. It moved through matter the way a signal moved through a wire. We cut through the opposite wing and exited through the old fire escape on the west side. The door hadn't been used in months, maybe years. It groaned, but didn't resist. We stumbled into the alley, turned down toward the industrial corridor behind the hospital. The wind outside felt warmer now, heavier. I tasted metal in the back of my mouth. A faint tang that coated the air in that corridor like residue from cut wire. The glow from the crater wasn't visible here, but I still felt it pulsing in my legs. Even through the pavement, it was a long street, vacant buildings, shuttered warehouses, old civic supply hubs. We followed the access lane between 2 lots until the hospital lights faded behind us. Ben still walked in half steps, his head low, breathing through clenched teeth. The shimmer in his skin returned near his jaw, brighter now, like something under the surface was pushing outward. Neither of us said it, but we knew what it meant. He stopped near the edge of the rail depot and leaned against a maintenance pole, one hand on the crossbar, the other gripping the edge of his coat. "We're not supposed to be this close," he said. "To that thing, whatever it is. We weren't supposed to get this far into the zone." "Doesn't matter now. We need distance. North, east. Doesn't matter. Just far." My voice came out flatter than I intended. All the emotion was folded in on itself. We moved toward the depot's east wing, where the mechanical bays were still open. Most of the gear had been stripped. I guessed evac crews scavenged what they could before it all went bad. Rows of doors lined the back hallway. Tool rooms, shift quarters, maybe a break station if we were lucky. We slipped through a narrow doorway marked Safety Compliance and found a set of cabinets inside, half empty, but clean. A cracked sink in the corner still held a trace of water. I splashed my face once, bracing against the edge. Ben dropped to the ground near a desk and slid his back to the wall. He hadn't said a word since we left the alley. His fingers tapped against his leg. Once, twice, then stopped. I handed him one of the remaining water bottles and told him to drink. He nodded without looking. I told him I was going to check the next room, just to see if there was a first aid box or a tool chest with something better than the busted pry bar in my belt. He didn't argue. He didn't move. I stepped into the corridor. The floor creaked under my boots. Some of the lights overhead were intact, flickering in a half strobe that made the hallway feel narrower. The door ahead of me was marked storage. I pushed it open slowly and stepped inside. I stepped in some kind of wet mess. It was sticky, but I didn't pay any attention to it. I took one step forward, and that was as far as I went. Something snapped, quietly, not a sound I heard with my ears. It came from inside, somewhere deep, behind thought. My legs stopped first, then my arms, my neck. I was standing there, mid-step, my right hand still half raised toward the shelf. But nothing responded. Not muscle, not breath. My lungs didn't feel tight, my chest didn't hurt, but I wasn't breathing anymore. I tried blinking. I felt the muscles try, but the lids never closed. I could still see, still feel the cold air against my cheek, still hear the fluorescent hum above, but I couldn't move, not a little. The panic hit fast, not all at once. It started in the back of my skull and pushed forward, like heat rising behind the eyes. I wanted to scream, but the impulse went nowhere. No muscles fired, no cords flexed. My jaw stayed locked. Then something started moving behind my eyes. Not physically, mentally, like someone rummaging through drawers in a room I didn't know I had. Images, thoughts, feelings from 20 years ago. My father's voice, my mother's hands, a traffic light on Sycamore turning green, the sound of glass cracking in my apartment after a windstorm when I was 14. All of it shoved forward, not in memories, in presence. I was feeling them again, and something else was watching. I wasn't unconscious. I wasn't asleep. I was awake inside a locked frame. I tried to move inward, tried to crawl inside my own head, to find something untouched, a piece of self no one could reach. But every time I found it, every time I saw the edge of something real, it was like fingers brushed it, erased it, catalogued it, and moved on. There was no pain, just exposure. I didn't know how much time passed. It could have been 30 seconds or 3 minutes. I felt something shift in the doorway behind me, heard the scuff of boots on the floor. Ben's voice came in low. "Hey." No response from me. I couldn't turn to face him. "What are you doing?" He stepped closer. I heard him stop. Then he made a sound, short and confused. I wanted to tell him to back off. I wanted to say, "Don't touch me. Don't come near this. Run now." But nothing moved. Not my mouth, not my hands. I couldn't protect him. He stepped close. I felt his hand brush my shoulder. Then, a half second later, I heard him fall. The sound was soft, more like a slip than a collapse. I saw part of him in my peripheral vision. His body hit the floor sideways, legs folding underneath, arms limp at his sides. His face turned upward just enough to catch the flicker of the failing ceiling light. He didn't move. The shimmer on his skin had returned fully now. It was no longer faint. It pulsed, under his jaw, down his neck, across the palms of both hands. His chest didn't rise. No breathing, no twitching. His body wasn't locked the way mine was. It was off. Whatever was inside him had decided it was time. A new sound started, not outside, inside my head. Not a voice, but a storm. Flashes of images too fast to process. Blueprints. Landscapes I didn't know. Structures that shouldn't exist. The thrum of machines with no engine noise. I felt it push forward through me, like a wire threading from the base of my spine into the back of my skull. Thoughts that weren't mine flooded through channels that shouldn't have been there. And somewhere behind it all, I felt my own name disappear. Not erased. Replaced. I was still there, but something else was steering now. My thoughts turned sideways. Reality flickered like bad reception. I could still see the broken sink, still hear the hum, but all of it started to distort. Shapes bent, light pulled inward. My awareness stretched like it had been smeared across the walls. I tried to hold on to one thought, one memory, a voice, a name, my mother's laugh. The way Ben tapped his boots on pavement when he was thinking. The smell of fresh bitumen on a clean street. Anything. I tried to picture a time before this. Before the sirens. Before the crater. But every image I reached for slipped through. My brain would find the shape of something familiar, then flatten it, turn it into noise or static. The edges curled away and left blanks. And those blanks widened with each second. Every moment of stillness made the silence more permanent. I wasn't breathing anymore, not consciously. I couldn't feel the air, or taste it, or react to it. My chest didn't rise. My muscles didn't shift. It wasn't pain. It wasn't sleep. It was worse. Pure observation without agency. I was seeing, hearing, remembering, but I couldn't act on any of it, not even to scream inside my own head. At some point, seconds or minutes later, I couldn't tell. I heard movement, not from behind, from the side, to my left, near the frame of the open door, a slow rhythm, like joints clicking together. My eyes couldn't move to track it. I only saw what entered the edge of my vision. It stepped forward into the room like it already knew I was there. Not searching, not scanning, just present. It was taller than the one I saw at the hospital. This one was at full height, close to the ceiling, just low enough to clear the panels. Its arms hung with an unnatural looseness. No wasted motion. The frame of its torso pulsed in slight waves, like something inside it moved independently of the outer shape. The texture of its skin, if it could be called that, was smooth but not reflective. Matte grey-black, with patches of blue-white light coursing just beneath the surface. Not veins, not energy, signals. Its head wasn't a head. There were no eyes, no mouth, just a narrow crest that widened slightly in front, like a curved edge meant to split light or air. It turned slightly toward me, and then stopped moving altogether. The hum that had been growing in the room dropped in pitch, then stabilized. I couldn't move, but I could feel something adjusting inside me, like gears realigning. I knew it was looking at me, not with eyes, not with anything biological, just awareness. My thoughts weren't private. My memory wasn't mine anymore. It was accessing something directly, without permission, without friction. As if my brain had become an unlocked file system it was skimming through. The harder I tried to focus on any image, my apartment, the city, the alley where we found that first body, the faster it blurred and disappeared, replaced by stillness. The creature leaned closer. Not physically, I don't know how else to describe it. My field of perception changed, like a lens being pressed against my mind. I felt it moving inside my head without making a sound. There were no words, no message, but I understood what it was doing. It was recording, categorizing, breaking me down into patterns and emotional residue, not for torture, not for dominance, for storage. It was as if my fear itself was being filtered into useful segments, labeled, archived, the smells, the tension, the memories of motion. It all separated and hung there, weightless, detached from meaning. I wasn't Daniel anymore. I was the record of a Daniel, a copy still running. Then the thing stood straight again. The hum in the walls dropped another octave. The glow beneath its surface faded slightly. Without turning, it moved toward the doorway and stopped just inside the threshold. It waited. Then it left. There was no sound of a door, no footsteps. It didn't disappear. It simply left the space, and the room returned to stillness. The fluorescent light above me flickered back to a steady hum. The walls cooled, but I remained. Frozen, trapped. I don't know how long I stayed that way. Minutes passed, then hours. I felt them. My awareness didn't blink. There was no hunger, no sleep, just observation. My body didn't ache. My limbs didn't fall numb. I wasn't dead. I wasn't even dying. I was paused. Later, maybe a few hours, maybe a day, Ben returned. I heard his steps. They were uneven, slower than before. He stopped in the doorway, breathing hard. I couldn't see his face. I couldn't turn to him, but I heard his voice. Just once. Dan? Silence followed. Then he dropped. I heard his knees hit the tile, then nothing. When I finally saw him again, in the far edge of my vision, he was on his side, curled just feet from where I stood. His body didn't shake. His limbs didn't twitch. He was still, but not frozen the same way. His skin glowed softly now, steady, like a low pulse. The shimmer had spread, across his arms, his neck, up through his face. His eyes were closed. Days passed. I didn't see the sun. The light above me cycled once, then never again. I counted changes in sound, distant echoes through the hall, soft drips from somewhere above. Metal groans in the structure. The city had gone quiet again. No helicopters, no shouts, no boots. At some point, the need to think started to fade. Not through forgetting, through detachment. I stopped reaching for memories, stopped naming what I saw. The words were still there, but they felt less important. Shapes, textures, durations. That's all I registered. Eventually, I couldn't tell how long it had been. The room changed color, not because of light, but because my mind couldn't hold the color anymore. Then, even that passed. The image of the room, the sound, the sense of time, none of it registered. The only thing that remained was the storm. It had started again. Not loud, just low, continuous, something between a whisper and a signal. I felt it pressing behind my eyes again, circling where identity had once lived. The storm wasn't chaos. It was direction. I was no longer the narrator. I was the file. And somewhere out in the world, something was still listening. And that's where we'll stop for now. Thanks for listening till the end. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me how the story hit you, what moments worked, what didn't, and what you'd want to hear next. And a big thank you to everyone supporting the channel, especially with extra membership: Carlos Herrera, Luca Mod, The Great Anywho, Jay Dalla, Madam Midnight, Deborah Powell. You keep this project alive. Until next time, Survivor. Jack's Nightmares signing off.